This is Tired Metalhead Weatherman. I hope you guys have had a good Tuesday. So, as promised, I'm going to be talking about the severe weather threat for tomorrow. There was a slight risk issue for today, but not too much has really come out of it. But we do have some interesting scenarios going on for tomorrow. We have two areas now that have slight risk, including Idaho and Utah. Would not expect to be seeing these areas with a severe weather threat of any kind, but yet here we are. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into that real quick. We'll discuss the timing of our big severe weather threat over here towards the Great Lakes a little bit later. But quickly touch on this real quick. So to put it in the simplest terms, basically this afternoon National Weather Service saw sufficient enough mixed layer cape or surface based cape around this region here, and the low level jet streak of about maybe 50 knots. Not the most impressive features that I've ever seen with a storm system, but it's sufficient enough to maybe cause a damaging wind gust or two, especially around this slight risk region. But we also can't disinclude areas like Cedar City, Salt Lake City, Pocatello. I'm gonna assume that's what the name is, Pocatello. If I'm botching that, please let me know in the comments. But we also have Boise in play for that as well. And then we do have a tiny little sliver of Nevada as well, involved in this as well, right around the northeastern corner. But the main threat with this will basically be damaging winds. Hail threat's pretty much non-existent with this. And with that being said, we will move on to the Great Lakes here, the eastern Great Lakes to be exact. Now, I went over this area a little bit in yesterday's video, but there have been some changes since then. This severe weather area, both the marginal and the slight risk, have expanded now, especially a little bit further to the south and west. Whereas yesterday we were kind of more concerned about Cleveland being at risk. That still is the case, but now we also have areas like Pittsburgh and Columbus in play for a slight risk of severe weather. But not in the slight risk, but still in the threat area would be areas like Burlington, Albany, and Binghamton as well. Can't forget Scranton, Pittsburgh, Springfield, Ohio, Cincinnati. You guys are in there too, and even as far west as Indianapolis, and even as far south as Louisville. We look at our hazard types, and we do have a very marginal tornado threat. I do think this threat exists earlier in the evening. As we push further and further out into the evening, I think the threat shifts towards damaging winds. Then by probably about maybe 8 or 9 o'clock Eastern time, the severe threat starts to go down drastically. And by about maybe midnight, I think our threat's just about over at that point. Our wind threat and our hail threat are going to be our biggest threats. I'm mainly concerned the most about damaging winds. This kind of setup kind of lends itself towards clusters and line segments of storms, which kind of increases the damaging wind potential. Not to say that we don't have the lapse rate and the parameters together for a hail threat, and that's mainly going to exist almost against the coast of the shores of the Great Lakes and parts of northern Ohio as well, maybe even pushing towards central Ohio. We can't disinclude Columbus being in that slight risk, but really any areas in the brown have a chance for large hail tomorrow. Go ahead and take a look at some of the parameters I saw in the synopsis. One big talking point has been the dew points. The Gulf moisture has really made a big advance to the north over the last several days. So by the time we're expecting these storms, we got a lot of areas that are going to be in the mid to upper 60s, and some places even 70 by the time these storms are arriving. And then as we get into the overnight here, those dew points will eventually start to drop off and with that, our storm threat will as well. So we'll go ahead and go to the other ingredients we have here. We're going to mainly look at our mixed layer cape. We're going to move back to about maybe, I would say 5 o'clock. I would like to say, and that's when our peak cape is going to be right about 3, 4, 5 o'clock ish. We're sitting at about maybe 2,500. Some places even closer to 3,000 joules per kilogram. It's where our severe weather threat's going to be highest. And here is a sounding that has a tornado as its probable hazard type here. Our cape values are sitting at 3,000 with this sounding, and we have a temperature of 86 degrees and a dew point of 68 with very sufficient lapse rates as well. So we'll definitely be looking for hail in this area. If you look at the hordeograph, we have our curve, we have our signature curve here. Very telling sign of a potentially rotating storm based off this model. One good thing is that the significant tornado parameter, relatively low. I don't expect these tornadoes to be super strong. I don't expect them to be long lasting, but I've seen crazier things happen before too. So have to go here. We'll have to just go ahead and watch that really closely. But if we go here and take a look at the wind barbs here, we're kind of getting an idea of our directional shear. Isn't a whole lot, so it's I would say 45, 65, or maybe 35, 65 chance that these storms really produce tornadoes. I would say it's less than 50-50 shot. But like I said, we'll just have to watch this play out and see how things unfold from here. Once we get further and further into the evening, though, the threat really starts to diminish. We start to lose a lot of that energy in the atmosphere. And we won't have to worry about anything else on Thursday in this region. Just kind of have to keep an eye on things from there. Alright, so now that we've quickly touched on the severe weather threat, let's go ahead and talk about the tropics here, because there's been a lot going on here. So we got Hurricane Fiona that's on the cusp of becoming a Category 4 now. Not much has changed with her track. We're still looking at these far eastern parts and far southern parts of Canada being at risk for a landfall from an extratropical cyclone that would still be pretty close to hurricane strength by the time it gets there. But I also want you to direct your attention to the right. Now we have Tropical Storm Gaston, or Gaston. I don't know why I keep on dropping the T with that. But Tropical Storm Gaston formed probably about, I would say, 5 o'clock today. Maybe a little bit earlier. This is the 5 o'clock Eastern advisory, though. And we're looking at a storm with 40 mile per hour winds, central low pressure of 1,009 millibars, scooting off to the northeast at 17 miles an hour, and no real threat to land. We'll go over the path real quick with him, and basically it's gonna do a little hairpin turn and just kind of remain out at sea and meander. So for the most part, unless you're happening to be on some sort of boat around this region in the North Atlantic, I don't expect Gaston to be too big of a problem. But I also want to avert your attention to this southern piece of energy right here. This is the one that the weather community, and myself included, have been talking about a lot. Because this is expected to move off to the west and get into this area that we've been talking about, where really very few storms, if any at all, have been. And that's in the southern part of the Caribbean. And the way this loop current around here in the Atlantic is going right now, this could be very well steering this into the Gulf. I kind of went over this in the video I put up this morning. But simply put, a lot of scenarios are running about to where this storm could be making a potential landfall somewhere around the Gulf Coast. A lot of there's been a lot of looks towards Florida in particular, and we'll go into detail with that in a minute. But before we do that, we'll go ahead and take a look at the satellite in motion. We'll look at the water vapor imagery. We'll start out by looking at Fiona because she is quite a sight to behold on satellite right now. She's formed into an incredible storm, and you can see additional thunderstorms forming on that right side here. Look at her, got that buzz. Look at her with that buzzsaw spin, really well defined eye, and just like you could actually, if you could really zoom in on it, you could almost see how it has a perfectly clear center, and then as we go further off to the north and east, we can see Tropical Storm Gaston, which is formed earlier today. See a little bit of convection. You see a very well pronounced center of circulation. And then here is our most recent tropical low that we are concerned about getting into the Caribbean. Still pretty disorganized at the moment, but it will begin to get into a very favorable environment. And over the next 3 to 5 days, I would say, would be very concerning to I kind of lost on the words there, but I would be surprised if this didn't develop. Basically, the next named storm on the list is, I think it's Hermaine, if I remember correctly. I don't have the list in front of me, but if I remember correctly, Hermine's the next one in line. Odds are, I'm gonna guess this tropical low here is going to be named Hermine. And then we also, of course, have additional pieces of energy coming off of West Africa. We'll watch those, but most of these storms most of these pieces of energy are going to be kicked out to sea long before they become a threat, any sort of major threat to land. Alright, so with that being said, let's go ahead and look at the operational models for a change here. We're going to look at the GFS operational, and we'll watch Fiona go out to sea, but we'll also be watching this piece of energy right here and seeing what the operational has in store for it. So we'll start out with the GFS, and usually the trend with the GFS, and I'll usually use this phrase here, GFS doing GFS things, it'll have this storm strengthen into something extreme, like what we're seeing right here, 933 millibar storm, which is basically a category 4 or 5. And while that's not entirely unreasonable given the environment that it would be going into should it make it into the Gulf, I'm not entirely sold on that. I do think that this will become a very strong storm if these trends continue, because we've been seeing these trends for about maybe 2 to 3 days now. But yeah, this would be a nightmare scenario for any part of the Gulf Coast that it would hit. No matter how seasoned you are when it comes to hurricanes, this seems like it would be a pretty big storm. So that's the GFS, and that's still about over 200 hours out by this point, so a lot can happen with this. I've seen runs like this 1,000 times and nothing comes from them at all. So take this with a grain of salt, but towards the Gulf Coast states, maybe I'll put it to you like this. The Weather Channel does a tropical update during the 50 or 10 till every hour, right? So maybe every once in a while I would check that just to kind of see how this thing's progressing, just in case, because the last thing you would want is for it to be right here knocking on the door and you're not ready to go. Because if it comes to fruition that we get a storm like this, you don't want to be caught sleeping, because that could be disastrous. Alright, let's go ahead and move back a little bit here, and we'll go to the Euro. Euro only goes 90 hours out as far as this run is concerned. So we're going to actually sneak back to 12Z. So let's see what the 12Z Euro has for us here. We'll have to wait for the OOZ Euro to kick in before we really get on board with anything recent from it. But the Euro also has it as a very strong storm, 954 millibar. It's kind of where Fiona is right now, which would still be a Category 3 plus storm, still be a major hurricane at landfall. And again, it looks like Florida. Euro has it kind of pushing a little bit further to the east, I would say. So this would put areas like Tampa, Panama City, you're still in danger, but I don't think it would be a direct infall like what the GFS will be showing. But areas like Tampa, Florida Keys, we would have to watch you guys really closely. But yeah, this is a very concerning run. The fact that our top models are both kind of leaning towards a storm getting into the Gulf is definitely interesting. And we'll just have to see how these runs play out over the next couple of days. Because that's going to be really foretelling as to what happens next. I do think it gets into the Caribbean, but the question is, what does it do from that point? And I did see a little bit of dry air aloft when we went through our satellite imagery here. You can see it represented in this little yellowish color here. So it'll be interesting to see what that does over the next week. If that clears out, then that's gonna make for a much more conducive environment that's already sitting over extremely warm water. We've had buoys that are sitting in the mid to upper 80s, some probably even sitting at 90 right now. And basically no storms have been over this area, so there's no sort of upwelling that really would slow this down. Wind shear has been light here all year, so this could be a very dangerous situation should that forecast come to fruition. But all we can do is take it one step at a time and see if it even gets to that point. Of course, I will be updating on this page as often as I can, as often as I need to. But this is the end of the video here for me. I hope you guys like this one. Tried not to make this too long. I hope it's not 20 minutes. If it is, I'm sorry. But I'll have another video for you guys tomorrow, whether it's severe weather or tropics. Regardless, we're going to just keep the train rolling here. But until the next video, this has been Tired Metalhead Weatherman. Hope you guys have a good night. I'll see you soon.